afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to my channel and watching this video. In a previous discussion, we were talking about how there may be physical benefits that we can use eugenics for. In today's episode, we will be doing the second part of that video. We will be discussing what possible downsides there might be to eugenics. And I would like to remind you that I'm specifically focusing on the physical and possibly quantitative aspects of eugenics, as the moral philosophy surrounding it have been done beautifully by other authors.
Number 1. We may actually have difficulty in understanding what it is that is desirable in a human if we were to select for certain traits. For example, the Nazis are stereotypically alleged to have been on the path of building some kind of Übermensch or superman that was a form of eugenic marvel. He would be tall, strong, muscular, blonde hair, blue eyes, white, fair skin, and only of pure Aryan Germanic descent. That is the stereotype the Nazis have been alleged with. But if they had their way, would we have had this so-called Übermensch? So, the Nazis supposedly wanted blue eyes. Well, DukeHealth.org says that people with blue eyes struggle with light radiation. They often have discomfort and are at greater risk of developing vision problems associated with light sensitivity. And then what of the blonde hair and fair skin? Well, as time is progressing, we are finding out that one of the consequences of our advanced technological age is that we have tremendous pollution, and this pollution is believed to cause holes in the ozone layer. And with these holes in the ozone layer, we have people all over the world being exposed to increasing amounts of ultraviolet radiation. Are we certain that blonde hair and fair skin are superior to darker skin or to darker hair? Surely, I would imagine that darker skin and darker hair has advantages in terms of being resistant to ultraviolet radiation. That is believed to be why, when you look at a map of the planet where there is the most exposure to ultraviolet radiation, it also interestingly correlates with higher pigmentation of melanin within the skin, resulting in darker skin tones. So it is interesting to wonder about whether or not this Übermensch, this Überman, would have actually been a modern genetic superman.
And as well as height, as you can see, I am about 6'7". I am a tall man, and not in too bad of a shape, if I dare say myself. And I can tell you that it takes tremendous effort for me to maintain my physique. I need to eat 160 to 180 grams of protein a day. Our ancestors surely didn't get that much. Could you imagine how much they would get? Interestingly, there was an Iceman by the name of Otzi who was discovered, I think, he was discovered in 1991, sometime at the border between France and Germany. And it was found that this Iceman had great deposits of calcium inside of his heart and in his cardiovascular system. He was on his way to some kind of embolism, to some kind of stroke, to some kind of heart attack. He was in grave danger because they ate so much meat. Allegedly. So even if you could find lean sources of protein like I am able to using today's modern technology, it would be deleterious to one's health to do so. Developing a profound musculature would not have benefited our ancient ancestors. In fact, if you look at what modern tribes look like when in isolated areas, they are healthy, they have powerful legs, and they are lean, but they have yet to look like bodybuilders or like the way warriors and tribal people are depicted in the films and media. And let us also go a bit further. Being overweight, regardless of whether it's muscle or fat, is deleterious to your health. Yes, it is healthier to be muscular than it is to be fat in many ways, partly because it involves that you are eating a healthier diet, you are exercising, you are avoiding a sedentary lifestyle. But rest assured, if you are some kind of behemoth, if you are like 50 pounds overweight from muscle, you will shorten your life. You will shorten your life from that. You will. That is the name of the game. I'm sorry. Your heart is going to have to be consistently pumping blood to all of those muscles. You may be healthier in the short term. There are arguments for that. There are arguments that, in terms of resilience and health and well-being, but in the long term, my friends, no, you will shorten your life. And the National Center for Biotechnology Information actually discusses how every inch over, I think it was 6 feet, it increases your risks of developing some kind of stroke or embolism. And I am a very tall man. I pray that this does not befall me. But it is not inherently genetically advantageous to be of great stature. So the idea that they would be building some kind of Ubermensch that is tall and proud and strong and powerful. If we selected for height, I want my children to be tall. I will select only for the tallest of my children. I will select in their DNA to make sure that only the tallest survive. Doing so would be rife with all kinds of repercussions that we had not previously anticipated. We could have problems with bone density. We could have problems with cardiovascular issues. We could have difficulties with strokes, cancer perhaps. Who knows? We would be selecting for adverse things that we had not previously thought carefully of.
Number 2. It is very possible that with genetic tampering, we may limit and reduce the amount of biodiversity that we have within our genes. In a previous video, I discussed how one of the cons associated with hydroponic gardens, which are gardens that are fed by water in artificial environments instead of being planted so as to increase crop yields in very tight spaces. One of the negative benefits of the way that we have our agricultural system set up, just fields of wheat or fields of tomatoes or simply one plant for miles and miles, is that in nature there is a little bit of pest control that happens automatically. A weevil that is accustomed to eating tomato plants, for example, or tobacco plants, will eat a tobacco plant, will populate that area, but then will be required to travel, will be required to encounter some kind of obstacles associated with finding new sources of food. And this to some degree limits their ability to both adapt and specialize to a specific food source, and it also limits the amount of damage that they can have upon that particular population of plants. But what happens now is, with planting these foods so close together, planting fields of one single crop, what happens is that an insect, such as a weevil, may become extremely specialized to digesting and processing that one plant. It will no longer have to face obstacles in securing new food source. It will have miles and miles and miles of a single plant, which you must realize has yet to be seen, is a modern phenomenon. It is a modern phenomenon. Historically, animals have to travel from food source to food source. It is rare to encounter miles of something like a tomato plant or miles of wheat. So just like in breeding different forms of grain, we lessen the biodiversity therein and therefore have unintended and unexpected adverse consequences, such as weevils that specialize in digesting wheat matter instead of having to have a more varied diet in which they can eat this and that, and also they can thoroughly saturate these crops to such a degree that they can destroy its entire yield. That could very well happen with humanity if we were to somehow select only for a certain kind of person because we believe it to be superior. That could very well happen. I mean, perhaps that is already what is happening. In a previous video, I discussed how possibly the advent of modern medicine and society and getting rid of parasites had the advantage of reducing the amount of calories expended in feeding these parasites, but at the same time, these parasites actually have adapted with us, and possibly their absence causes allergies, is one of the causes of allergies. That is speculative, but it is very possible we will have very similar physical side effects if we select for a certain category of people and only proliferate that. If we apply natural selection and eugenics to the human race, it is very possible that certain illnesses, such as perhaps maybe this is what happens with AIDS, maybe this is what is happening with the coronavirus, perhaps there are more and more diseases that are adapting to humanity, that are adapting to our narrow gene pool, which I am curious if it is so narrow. But it is very possible that these diseases and illnesses are adapting to our increases in medicine and to our increases in knowledge of vaccination. It is possible that it is an arms race, like in all other aspects of biology. Who is to say that we actually will dominate and win in this battle? Let's say we develop what methods of perfectly isolating genes. What makes us so sure that there may not be other adverse consequences as of this? What makes us so sure that nature will not adapt to this? That nature will not step to our tune in that regard? It is possible for more diseases to latch on to human hosts, such as viruses and fungal infections and bacterial infections, simply because we have a more narrow scope of genetic diversity. Number 3, we may have adverse consequences for short-sighted problems, long-term solutions to short-term problems, so to speak. As in the last example that I gave, I will give a different example this time as to how perhaps our meddling with eugenics has caused problems and may continue to cause problems. For example, the antibiotic resistance in animals has been found to have been passed down to the medical industry and to ways in which people encounter resistant strains of various bacteria, because the way that farms produce their meat is they often include antibiotics in the feed. And what this does is it trains and exercises and empowers the bacteria who survive this onslaught. They develop a resistance to the antibiotics provided to these animals as a resistance to these microorganisms. And eventually, we simply will not have antibiotics to combat them, which is already the case with things such as Versa and MRSA, vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, I think. But let me give you an example I saw once on a TED documentary. Let's say, for example, we go about wishing to get rid of mosquitoes. So let us pretend that in this scenario, we start putting pesticides or selecting genetically for homosexual mosquitoes in order to demolish the population by reducing the amount that they can reproduce, or somehow creating some kind of virus that hijacks their DNA and makes them all sterile. We could do all of these things, or parts of them. Let's say that we found some way to get rid of all mosquitoes tomorrow night. Well, what would happen? The first thing that would happen is we would have no more male mosquitoes to pollinate the plants, since that is what the males do. So then once these male mosquitoes are gone, then there's going to be a lot less mosquitoes, but there's also going to be a lot less vegetation, a lot less plants. And if there is less vegetation, then that means that there will be a drought because water will perhaps evaporate into the sky and it will be blown by a wind and it might go away. As in nature, one of the many benefits of ample foliage is that it acts as a storehouse for water. And the interesting fact is, watermelons actually were originally bred by humans along the Nile in order to store water. Early watermelons were not delicious and sweet. They probably didn't taste very sweet at all, but they stored a lot of water, and people grew them specifically so that they could carry water with them on journeys. So plants act to store water in an environment, and the lack of mosquitoes pollinating them will certainly cause these plants to not be around anymore, and that will cause a drought as water evaporates from the soil. It may very well contribute to global warming. These evaporations, as they go into the air, they may very well be carried by the wind somewhere else. They may very well cause certain parts to completely dry up. And in fact, I think there was another strange documentary I saw somewhere. Please do your own research. But I think I saw a documentary once that discussed how there was some kind of attempt by a large empire to, I think it was China or some other country, that deliberately tried to grow ample rainforests in Africa. They tried to synthetically grow vegetation and rainforests in order to specifically keep water from leaving and going into the Americas. It's some attempts in which people have tried to weaponize the weather and vegetation and the ecosystem. And since there are also less vegetables to eat, less vegetation, of course, there are going to be less herbivores. People who are reliant upon bushmeat, for example, many people in Africa are reliant upon hunting to feed their families. So there will be less to hunt because there will be less trees. There will be less herbivores. There will be less fauna because there is less for them to eat. And likewise, in the previous example, there we may see an increase in the number of highly specialized pests, as they will be forced to leave their natural habitats, which are now dried up, and they will be forced to go into areas that are used for agriculture, and they may develop a resistance to antibiotics there. They may develop a resistance to pesticides, and they may specialize in consuming the crops that we grow, and that might bring about greater famines in areas that are already struggling to meet caloric needs for their citizens. And these organisms, these animals, bugs, may flock to areas that were previously used for agriculture, as they are the only remaining areas that have ample, lush foliage.
It has been such a pleasure studying this subject, and I'm so happy that you watched this video. If you have any comments or concerns or critiques, I take all criticism. Please lay it on me in the comments. I will read it. If I have less than 100, I have read your comments. So please let me know below. What other cons do you see according to eugenics? Do you see any, aside from the fact that there are morality issues? And I guess if I want to touch on that, I will say, what does it say of a society that does these things? If a society says that they will select for this, that, and the other thing, and then exterminate everyone else, I would say that the larger issue with that is that, will it stop there? Or will these people be bound to their cruelties, and they will treat other people in terrible ways as well? They will be incapable of compassion for their own kind, don't you think? Even if they did select for everyone, if they saw each other with such a calculated coldness, I shudder at how social interactions would be. Do you think people would be polite to each other? Would people be kind? Would people be loving? would the concept of a family even exist if, oh, let us throw this child off of a cliff because he is obviously has a cleft lip or he is not blonde? It's interesting. And that's a personal speculation. I'm not sure of this, so please just take this with a grain of salt. I suspect that one day we will discover in societies or in cultures in which the killing of fetuses or children, or, and I'm not speaking of any political issues here, but I wonder if eugenics in some way might inflame genetic illnesses and create greater precedences of genetic illnesses as some kind of reaction against natural selection no longer being applicable, and as some kind of reaction to human artificial selection. So I would love to know what you think. Please share your thoughts with me. If you liked my video, please, and only if you liked it, please consider subscribing. And if you are a lovely single woman this Valentine's Day, consider marrying me.